Warhammer 40K is a really cool franchise, full of interesting lore that can make for good video games. It's got a ton of them, though only a few are considered good, while the rest are varying degrees of alright to terrible. Here we have one of the lucky ones generally praised, Warhammer 40K Mechanicus, made in 2018 by Bulwark Studios. I like to describe this as a mixture of equal parts Darkest Dungeon and XCOM. It has fun tactical gameplay, despite a few flaws that only slightly drag it down. It also doesn't require a lot of, or really any, pre-knowledge of the same to enjoy, making it an alright entry point to the franchise. So whether you're a 40k fan or not, let's take a look. Now when I said you didn't really need any familiarity with the setting, I meant it. This game has a story, but it's not a real focus, and you could just have a fun time playing as little cyborg guys attacking a planet of robots while they argue whether or not to blow it up. But if you want to understand a bit more without diving into deep lore, here's the short version. You play as the Adeptus Mechanicus, a faction of humans based on Mars. Around 50,000 years ago, humanity had the best tech. It was so good they invented AI that did as AI does and tried to destroy all of humanity. The project guys decided to bury themselves within Mars to preserve all humanity's tech, but after 5,000 years, they gradually turned it into a religion. Praise be to the Omnissiah. Also, they now believe every machine has a soul called a machine spirit, which means you need to pray to your toaster to get it to work. Yeah, they didn't preserve the knowledge 100% accurately. Some of them think new knowledge is heresy, while others seek it out to learn. It's a conflict within the faction. The story of this game revolves around a Mechanicus ship landing on a planet that's actually a Necron tomb world. To summarize them, around 60 million years ago, they fought in a war that was so big, it turned the normal afterlife into hell. During that time, they went from flesh creatures to mostly mindless immortal robot bodies. Also, they had the best tech ever, and decided after the war to just go to sleep and outlast everyone with their immortality. They're also Egyptian themed for some reason. Well, now it's been several thousand years and they're starting to wake up, so the race is on. We need to deal with this planet, but should we scavenge it for its knowledge and resources, or destroy it for being heretical xeno filth? You'll play as the commander of this fleet, while your crewmates try to convince you to do things their way. You'll deploy on missions as you try to uncover the Tomb World's secrets, and maybe you'll find out what happened to the last expedition here. The game isn't here for narrative. There's not a lot of what you would call plot points, but that's not to say the writing's bad. The actual dialogue and narrative descriptions are effectively done. If you're a fan of this faction, well, it's likely you've already played this, but it'd be worth picking up to see the interactions and interfaction dialogue and debates between the different philosophies of the Mechanicus. But let's go back to a standalone no 40k knowledge mindset. This game is perfectly fun for those who just want a tactics game. It's very mission based, with you having a squad of guys you can customize and send out, while they'll journey through a maze of rooms, encountering various events, and get into turn-based strategic battles. During missions you'll amass Blackstone, the game's currency, while also increasing the awakening meter, which I'll get into later. Completing missions will also always result in a new piece of equipment, or maybe result in a new unit you can bring along next time. There's a good amount of detail to go over with the gameplay, so before we get into it, let's touch on the presentation. From a technical standpoint, the game's graphics are doing alright. Textures are good, but not the most impressive. Weapons and environment effects are nice, but don't always have the biggest oomph. The environments are all Necron based, which, while fitting, also start to feel repetitive after a while, with different areas changing color not doing too much to help. For its gameplay sections, the graphics are very competent, but not great. It makes up for this with 40k's general art direction and good artwork. 40k has a good aesthetic, and the Adeptus Mechanicus' religious cyborg thing is a good look. All their designs and equipment look cool, just like the source material. Then we have this game's artwork, such as its character portraits or event images. These get to be a bit more detailed than the 3D models, and work at capturing the ancient greatness of the tomb world or the mechanical complexity of what counts as the Mechanicus' face. Getting into sound, I'll start with the voice acting. Dialogue tends to be spoken, but mostly not in English. In the lore, the Mechanicus speak in machine language for maximum efficiency. The devs translated that as this. I don't know how I'd describe it, but I know it sounds pretty cool. The Necrons, on the rare occasion they get to speak, do speak normally though, and they sound good too.
I wake with the turning of aeons. Stars yet burn, life yet blossoms. Is it truly time?
Keeping the hard to describe theme going, we have the music. The game's soundtrack essentially works on two axes. The first goes from grim and depressing to epic and exhilarating, while the second goes from electronic techno to church orchestra. The second one tends to bleed more into each other. But needless to say, the game's music is unique, though very fitting. You're playing as cyborg tech monks, so why doesn't their music sound like sci-fi religious stuff? In summary, it's a good soundtrack. So now let's move on to the gameplay, and I'll start with mission structure. From your main base, you'll select a mission. You'll generally have a bunch to pick from and be able to see the rewards and types of enemies you'll encounter going in. After that, you'll fill up your squad and be on your way. Now you're on a map that's actually the view screen from the main ship. You'll go room to room, having 3 types of encounters. The first is glyph rooms. You'll encounter something and be given a choice of glyphs to press. These glyphs always do the same thing, so if you press one and it gives you money, that design will always do that. You can learn these to great advantage, and if you use them enough, they'll eventually be highlighted as good or bad to keep things simple. Then we have event rooms, where you'll come across something like a potential trap or a dead soldier, or even a room where the Necrons store their tabletop figures. You'll be given 3 choices here that will result in either a positive or negative effect, though it's a bit more difficult to figure out here. You'll gradually get more of an idea of which choices right as you play, but you'll never fully make the right choices all the time, so it'll feel a bit like random chance. While these can have detrimental effects, it should rarely ever be something that costs you the mission outright. What'll really decide that are the combat encounters. Usually at the main goal of the mission, you'll find yourself getting into combat, and there's a good amount to break down here. Basic format involves you deploying units at the start, with the goal of either destroying all enemies, accessing terminals around the map, or bringing all your units to an escape point. Each turn the unit can move a set amount and perform actions depending on their equipment and the amount of cognitive points, CP, you have. Say I have a tech priest with a melee weapon and 2 guns equipped. I could theoretically attack with all 3 on the same turn. This depends on what's equipped though. Some weapons can be fired for free, while some cost CP to use or have a cooldown. So maybe you've equipped a big AoE weapon that can hurt a bunch of guys at once but costs CP with a 2-turn cooldown, or maybe you decide to go with a pistol that does measly damage to a single target but can fire every turn for free. Every time you use it also awakens the weapon's machine spirit, which can grant a bonus effect like more damage. So with a varied arsenal, you'll smash and blast your way through the Necron horde. To help you also have class abilities, which do a wide variety of things to support your units, and canticles, one-time permission abilities which can do things like heal a unit to full, or boost your next attack with a bunch of extra damage. You'll get a lot of options as you play. Now when it comes to actually fighting, the only things that matter are range and armor. Armor is simple, divided between physical and energy, and acts as a flat reduction. 2 points of physical armor means all weapons dealing physical damage will do 2 less. Enemies typically will be focused on one or the other, so a team that can deal damage in both is preferred. Then we have range, which is pretty self-explanatory, but important to keep in mind is that you can shoot across great distances, and so can the Necrons. You might notice I haven't mentioned accuracy, and that's because it doesn't exist. If you're in range, you'll hit. That simple. You also have these minion units which only have 1 or 2 skills, but are expendable cannon fodder to help finish off an enemy, or act as a literal meat shield. Really, this game has a lot to do with positioning. Combat can be very lethal if you aren't careful, and keeping cover in mind can be the difference between an alive or dead tech priest. The default game options don't have permadeath though, so don't be afraid if you mess up. Positioning also matters when it comes to CP. You gather it through these Necron towers and such, and they refill every turn. Keeping it close by to continuously harvest them can be really important. You can also harvest them from the bodies of dead Necrons, the only problem being their immortality. Given enough turns, they'll get up unless you finish them off, so you can plan around how long to keep them intact to harvest from their corpse. That's mostly it for the broad strokes of missions in combat, so let's look at afterwards. Once you complete a mission, you come to the Mechanicus ship to manage your units. Here you can spend Blackstone to level them up, having them go down several skill trees, or skill lines as it were. These can revolve around melee combat, range combat, support, healing. It looks like a good system with a bunch of variety. Here's where the game's problems come up. So when you start the game and play a few missions, it will be a decently challenging time. The game won't mess around and you won't have a lot of resources. It's hard, but also generally fair. Once you start upgrading your tech priest, the difficulty jumps off a cliff. This game is massively unbalanced in the player's favor. It's not a question of what the overpowered strategy is, it's which one's the most overpowered. These skill trees can do things like reduce the cost of an action by 2 every turn, to making you immune to counter melee strikes when you move away from an enemy, to allowing you to summon any minion unit anywhere on the map at the cost of 1 CP, even a giant castellan robot that usually costs 5. The Necrons just don't have a counter for an upgraded tech priest. Even without that, the skills aren't balanced between each other, some of the trees just being way more useful than the others. That could even be said about the equipment in general, as you'll get a bunch of guns, but likely only use a handful that just work better. I like all the options the game gives me, but when I can make a team that enters every battle invisible until the act, I start to feel bad for the Necrons. The Necrons come in a bunch of types too, from range to melee to weird combinations. They all have their own purpose in combat and generally feel unique. The best hope they have to fend you off though would be the boss fights. And to give some credit, they do a good job of making them a bit more challenging while each have their own gimmick and design. Only a bit more challenging though. But you can't completely fool around, as I should go more into the awakening meter. The more you explore the Necron tomb, the more they'll wake up and want to kill you. The whole game has a timer of sorts, a meter that counts up to 100, forcing you to the final boss fight once it does. It's not a death sentence or anything though, so don't stress out about it too much. Every mission has its own meter that starts at 0. Every encounter and every turn in combat will gradually fill this meter up. The higher it gets during the mission, the more Necrons will spawn and the stronger they'll get. Once the mission is done, it will be pulled into the overall meter. You can lower the mission meter though, by destroying terminals or getting lucky with room encounters. If you're good enough, the meter will only go up 1 or 2 points per mission. Overall, I think the mechanic's a good way to make sure you don't sit back and chase enemies across the map, while also not being too hard on the player. I made sure to complete missions efficiently while destroying terminals, and my total meter was far from 100 by the time I was done in a normal playthrough. Even then, again, being forced to do the final boss fight likely will result in an unwinnable situation, unless you really mess up. To summarize the gameplay, we have a well done tactical combat system that emphasizes positioning and equipment, hampered by its unbalanced skills in the player's favor. We have a set of cool enemies and bosses, similarly hampered by a player obliterating them instead of being a proper challenge. We also have a timer to keep the player from being too laid back, as it ramps up the difficulty of missions and gradually calls you into the final boss. Despite its faults, I like the gameplay. Sure, it has problems, but its strong points more than make up for it. And hey, who doesn't like a power trip every now and then? Aside from a minor graphical glitch where the UI elements would linger between screens, I do want to mention some nitpicks. Combat objectives can change once you complete the first one, so it can start as scan all terminals and then turn into kill all enemies afterwards. I don't have an immediate problem with this, except for the goal escape turning into something else. An escape mission implies leaving the area, not sticking around and killing everything afterwards instead of escaping. Early on I would try to run through and escape, but that would all turn meaningless when I had to stop and kill everything anyways. The game also has a hidden quest line that's really cool, but easily missable. From the ship menu, you can press the spacebar on PC and some other button on controller to see the secret quest line. I don't know why they felt the need to hide this, but look out for it if you pick this game up, it's totally worth it. Overall, Warhammer 40K Mechanicus is a flawed game, but still very enjoyable. It takes the cool setting and lore of 40k and actually gives us a fun video game for fans, while also being accessible to newcomers. While not the best looking game in terms of its in-game graphics, its artwork and music more than compensate. Its gameplay gives a lot of customization, allowing players to find their own ways to turn into a cakewalk. Even the game's options have a lot you can tweak to personalize your experience. I can see why it's held as one of the few really good 40k games, and I hope one day it can get a sequel that irons out its problems. So if you're a 40k fan who hasn't played this yet, someone wanting to dip their toe into the franchise, or someone who doesn't care and just wants a solid tactical RPG, go play Warhammer 40k Mechanicus. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you liked it for some weird reason, consider leaving a like or comment. If you didn't like it, well, leave a comment anyways about what I did wrong. If you want to hear about more games I think are neat, or whatever random thing I end up making videos on, maybe also think about subscribing. Whatever you choose to do, I hope you have a nice day.